can talk about your PlayStation 3s, your Xbox 360s, and your Wiis. But for me, the world of computer and video games was first opened up by the trusty old Commodore 64. I spent many hours playing on this 8-bit marvel, although admittedly some of that time spent was waiting for the damn game to load. But with over 1,000 games to choose from, there's no way that I could whittle this down to a mere top 10. So instead, here's the Big Daddy D's top 15 Commodore 64 games. Number 15! Nintendo had Mario and Sega had Sonic, but the Commodore 64 never really did have a mascot to call its own. They did have a few characters that came close to that title though. One of them was Clyde Radcliffe, star of the Creatures games, whom we'll come on to later on. The other was Codemaster's egg-shaped hero, Dizzy. There was an entire series of games featuring this little fella, so rather than choosing just one game, we're going to choose the best two in the series. The first one was Treasure Island Dizzy, the second game in the series and the first Dizzy game I played. Whilst the original Dizzy game gave you 3 lives but could only allow you to carry 1 item, Treasure Island Dizzy spun that idea around by allowing you to carry 3 items at once, but with only 1 life to complete the game with. Also unique to this game was that you were unable to select any particular item from the inventory for use. Dizzy would simply put down whatever item was at the top of the list. So if Dizzy was underwater and the snorkel happened to be at the top of the inventory list, he would drop the snorkel and instantly die. Ah! Therefore, Treasure Island Dizzy required a lot more foresight and planning than the other games in the series. The other game we're choosing is Dizzy Prince of the Yokefolk. Although this particular title was actually one of the smallest Dizzy games, it was the one that was easily the most well thought out. Each object in the game had an obvious use and wasn't quite as obscure as some of the puzzles featured in previous games. So there was none of the try it and hope for the best method that proved to be the downfall of some of Dizzy's other adventures. Also, people were beginning to get a bit fed up with some of the larger Dizzy games, like Magic Land Dizzy or Spellbound Dizzy, as you spent most of the time walking from one end of the game to the other just to solve one puzzle. Prince of the Yokefolk has also recently been remade for mobile phones too, ensuring that the legacy of the Eggy One continues. 14! The Commodore 64 had a lot of space shoot-em-ups, but this one was the best of the bunch. Flying around in a Millennium Falcon type aircraft, it was your mission to blast away loads of enemy spacecraft before destroying the Super Dreadnought. That's the large ship in the background. In fact, there were 15 of these dreadnoughts to take down, so beating this game would take time, and lots of it. Great graphics, fantastic music and sound effects, and it just played so smoothly. Not to mention that it got extremely addictive after a while. Next up, Midnight Resistance. This was a superb conversion of Data East's shoot-em-up arcade with outstanding graphics and a kick-ass soundtrack. Midnight Resistance had several refreshingly different levels to plough through, plenty of impressive power-ups, and many an assailant for your Johnny Rambo lookalike to shoot them down with. Midnight Resistance had the kind of playability that grabbed you and just wouldn't let go afterwards. Midnight Resistance also has the definition of being the first video game I completed ever, so naturally it holds a very special place in my heart. Years later, I would also get the game for the Sega Mega Drive as well, making this the first game I would own on multiple formats. 12! Barbarian, the Ultimate Warrior, was notorious for 2 things: plenty of blood and plenty of breasts, both in the game and on the cover. The game had superb fluid animation for its time, along with plenty of special moves to master, including the spinning neck chop. Whata! The amount of controversy that got kicked up over this game was insane, and only led to it becoming even more notorious. And bear in mind, this was years before Mortal Kombat. Loads of fun to play against a friend, and the one-player game would give you a decent challenge too. Barbarian's only real flaw was that it was a little on the slow side, especially when compared to something like International Karate for example. But this was definitely worth a swing if you preferred severing heads rather than kicking pyjama wearing blokes in the shins. 11. Next up, First Samurai. One of the best looking Commodore 64 games ever. First Samurai had some superb colourful graphics for its time, and it played just as well as it looked. How often did you get an 8-bit game with fight sequences on top of a moving train, with scenery moving at a blur behind the combat, with the action moving at an even more frantic pace? The answer was, not on the Sega Master System, NES or Game Boy, but on the Commodore 64, matey boy. This was an arcade adventure with lashings of beat-em-up and platforming elements that contained huge levels to explore, and some truly memorable boss battles to overcome. Truly one of the all-time greats. Number 10! Well, you know that it would either be Bubble Bobble or Rainbow Islands that would make the list, and I believe that I've made the right choice here. Using the rainbows of the game's title to travel up platforms and destroy nasties, its vertically scrolling levels were both novel and fun. There were also numerous power-ups to collect along the way too. Why create one rainbow when you can make 3? Unfortunately, the Commodore 64 version lacked the 2-player option of its arcade and console brothers. Otherwise, it would have been higher on the list. 9! So cute, it will make you puke. Rodland took numerous ideas from Bubble Bobble and Rainbow Islands and actually improved on them. Playing as either Tam or Rit, 2 long-haired fairies, okay, probably not the best choice of words, whose mother has been kidnapped and imprisoned in a mysterious tower. You will need to dispatch screen after screen of nasties by using the rod of the title to smack their little heads repeatedly against the ground until they explode. Most beaten to silence will then leave a power-up weapon behind, which Tam and Rit can then use to dispatch even more nasties. There were a huge number of boss battles to overcome too. These include tearful crocodiles, smiling whales and sleepy elephants. All vicious, but so cute it's a shame to hit them really. Although not as bright and as colourful as some of the other home versions, Rodland was still a blast to play in either 1 or 2 player mode, and for me, this gave it that slight edge over Rainbow Islands. Sorry Bub and Bob. 8! Myth. History in the making. An epic mixture of arcade adventure, platform action, and even a little bit of beat-em-up type shenanigans, alongside some serious, thought-provoking and fast-moving gameplay, as you battled against monsters from Greek, Norse and Egyptian mythology. There were also a number of riddles and puzzles to solve along the way, so actually knowing about various mythologies would actually help you. Not to mention that the soundtrack is one of the best that came out of the Commodore 64 sound chip, and that's saying a lot. 7! The best racing game on the Commodore 64 by none was Pitstop 2. All the fun of Formula 1 racing without that slimy little turd Bernie Eccleston popping up. Going into the pit stops themselves was also a game, where you had to change the tyres and top up the fuel yourself, and do it quickly too, I might add. Great to play in 1-player mode, but even better with 2 players. 6! System 3 has got a lot to answer for. They developed not only the First Samurai and International Karate games, but also the Last Ninja series as well. All 3 of the Last Ninja games mixed arcade adventuring with beat-em-up action, but the second game, Last Ninja 2, offers the most, with the best puzzles, graphics and playability of the lot. It can be fiendishly difficult at times, which can put players off. Otherwise, it probably would have scored even higher on the list. 5! So, Mario really did come out on the Commodore 64. Kind of. The Great Giana Sisters, although a fantastic platform game, was a little too reminiscent of a particularly well-known Nintendo title, featuring a certain fat Italian plumber with a porn star moustache. Running around a fantasy world, headbutting bricks, crawling down pipes. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Not to mention that Rainbow Art's attempts to turn the Goombas into apples was a tad obvious. Not long after its release, it was recalled and scrapped after Ninty won a legal battle to prevent it being sold. As a result of this, you'll be lucky to find a copy. They're nigh on impossible to find. Which is a shame really, as, shameless rip-off aside, the Great Giana Sisters was actually a very good game. You really won't find anything more Mario-like without buying a NES. Number 4! As mentioned previously, Nintendo had Mario, Sega had Sonic, but the Commodore 64 had Clyde. Becoming a star overnight, Clyde Radcliffe's debut appearance in Creatures took the basic platform game idea and introduced the torture screens, where Clyde would have a limited amount of time to rescue one of his kidnapped buddies from a rather graphic and bloody death at the hands of a nasty demon. These subsections proved to be so popular that the entire sequel, Creatures 2, was made up entirely of torture scenes. Creatures 2 Torture Trouble would also have the definition of being one of the best looking and best presented Commodore 64 games of all time. Not to mention the one with the weirdest cheat I have ever come across in all my years of gaming. If you wet your finger and rub it across joystick port 1, then you would get infinite lives. Strange, but true. I still to this day don't really know how they did it. I can't possibly choose from one of these two games, so what the hell. Both games going at number 4. Number 3! The year was 1993, and it certainly was a strange time for the Commodore 64. Most of the Commodore 64 owners were abandoning, or had already abandoned, their machine to go onto the bright, colourful 16-bit worlds found on the Amiga or the Sega Mega Drive. But in November of 1993, the makers of Creatures 1 and 2 released Mayhem in Monsterland, which showed that the Commodore 64 wasn't quite ready to sink into retirement yet. The graphics were amazing, extremely colourful and well detailed, and certainly wouldn't look out of place on one of the aforementioned 16-bit machines. The sheer speed of this game was amazing too, almost rivaling Sonic the Hedgehog. Not bad for an 8-bit home computer. Mayhem wasn't an easy game either, as things got really tough after the 3rd level. It's just a shame that this was one of the last truly great Commodore 64 games to come out. Considering that the game is now on the Wii's Virtual Console, it's certainly worth picking up and playing now. Number 2! Nintendo had Contra. Neo Geo had Metal Slug. Sega had Gunstar Heroes. But the Commodore 64 had Turrican. Both Turrican games were outstanding and featured some of the most stunning graphics you could ever see on an 8-bit computer. The soundtrack was sweet and the games played like a dream. There were also quite large games as well. Its many levels were a fair size, and there were a lot of them too. The two games are very similar to each other, so there's no way I could pick one out of the two. So again, what the hell, both games get the number 2 spot. Hey, if you don't like it, tough, it's my bloody list. Before we do a countdown of the top 10 leading up to the number 1 spot, we're going to take a look at some honourable mentions. Today's honourable mentions include Manic Mansion, a point-and-click adventure in the same style of The Secret of Monkey Island, but set within a creepy mansion. Games of this kind were rarely found on the Commodore 64 due to the large amount of memory usually required to cope with all the graphical data. Manic Mansion proved that the Commodore 64 could, to a certain extent, cope with these type of games, but only with a disk drive included. Bearing in mind that roughly only a mere 15% of Commodore 64 users actually owned a disk drive, it's no wonder that the game wasn't really more successful than what it should have been. Also getting an honourable mention is Elite. Although the game was highly addictive, it was basically copied from an old BBC micro home computer, and it looked like crap basically. Which again was unfortunate, as it did put a lot of players off. So, before we get to the number 1 spot, let's count down the top 15 and have some Top of the Pops music playing in the background. Hey, it's the 80s. At number 15, it's some excellent Eggventures. Who writes this crap? With the Dizzy games at number 15, in particular Treasure Island Dizzy and Dizzy Prince of the Oak Folk. In space, no one can hear you destroy Super Dreadnoughts with Uridium at number 14. Johnny Rambo lookalike blowing the shit out of everything that moves with Midnight Resistance. Plenty of blood and breasts make Barbarian the Mortal Kombat of its time at number 12. Pull on some pyjama bottoms and go swinging a sword about with First Samurai at number 11. Somewhere over the rainbow, it's Rainbow Islands at number 10. So cute it'll make you puke while you're bashing the brains out of some little creature. It's Rodland at number 9. Taking on legends from Greek, Norse and Egyptian mythology, it's Myth, History in the Making at number 8. Formula 1 racing without the bad weather and dodgy promoters, it's Pitstop 2. More arse-kicking action with Last Ninja 2. Sisters are doing it for themselves. Unfortunately, Nintendo didn't take quite kindly to it. It's the Great Giana sisters at number 5. It's Clyde Radcliffe and Torture Trouble with Creatures 1 and 2. The Commodore 64's Last Stand with Mayhem in Monsterland at number 3. More run and gun action inside a cyber suit with Turrican 1 and 2 at the number 2 spot. And finally, at number 1, the greatest Commodore 64 game of all time is... not just the greatest fighting game on the Commodore 64, but the best game full stop. Following on from the lawsuit that Data East had hit them with over allegations that their original title, International Karate, was a complete rip-off from Data East's own Karate Champ, System 3 knew that they needed something special to get Data East's lawyers off their back, and simultaneously give them the old two-fingered salute as well. That something special was actually something quite simple. A third character. This led onto International Karate Plus, or IK Plus as it's also known as. The addition of a third player led onto some real free-for-all combat that gave it the edge over any other fighting game. It was fun with one player, but it was even better with two, where you could gang up on the computer-controlled fighter and give him a good kicking. There were also some great bonus stages that popped up after every 2 matches, helping to break up the action and keeping the game fresh. Graphically, it was outstanding for the time, and the music and the sound effects sounded just like something out of Enter the Dragon. My question is, why hasn't anything like this been made since? International Karate Plus, or IK Plus, is the greatest Commodore 64 game of all time. And luckily, you can still play it on Nintendo Wii's Virtual Console. And that's all for another episode of the Big Daddy D Reviews. Until next time, goodbye. Hola!